Okay, I'm the Prime Minister, Derek Shaw, from King.
And I'm going to be the member of government, Tyler Jihari.
My name is Elia Wee. I'm going to be the leader of the opposition.
My name is Rithika Salwa. I'll be the MO.
Is everyone ready? Alright. Then, we'll start timing first.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Derek Shaw. I'm here today on the government side of the motion. This House, as a geologist, would not reveal the discovery of the oil reserves as the Prime Minister. So, before I get into my two contentions, I would like to start with some top case stuff. We'd like to define the weighing mechanism as utilitarianism for the geologist and the people of the country. So just what's best for the geologist and the people of the country from a utilitarian weighing calculus. We'd like to define reveal as telling the people of the country and the world that they have these oil reserves. And we'd like to offer a few characterizations. So first, as defined by the info side, we'd like to say that these oil reserves are actually large. We'd like to say that this country is poor. We'd like to say that this country was previously thought to lack significant natural resources and its economy was primarily agrarian. And finally, we would like to make the characterization as defined by the info side, so this really shouldn't be challenged, that if the geologist does not report the discovery of the oil reserves, it is unlikely that they will become known. Thus, I would like to get into my first contention, and my first contention is climate change. Judge, under both a utilitarian framework and even under like an egoist framework, which is pretty much utilitarian, but for the geologists only, climate change is one of the most important voters in this round. The reason for this is simple. Climate change will bring extinction if left unchecked. Extinction means the death of all of humanity, and under a util framework, it is the highest magnitude impact as well as the highest scope impact. This is true also under any sort of other framework, as the op may bring up. It's in the geologist's interest to keep the world alive to best benefit them. Now, why will the op world accelerate and cause climate change? There are two subpoints for why. First is oil extraction, and second is reversing global tides. Starting with oil extraction. Judge, it's simply undeniable that by extracting and thus refining the oil that is present in this country, because we can make the assumption that if this oil is being told, that if the geologist tells the country about the oil, it will be extracted. Again, it's a poor country, they don't have many other resources, they don't have many other forms of income besides their agrarian economy. They will extract this oil as a way to promote the economy of the country, as a way, sorry, did you say something? Okay, sorry. They will extract this oil because they see it as a way to make money, etc. And they will build, or they may enlist other nations help in refining the oil, but they will extract and refine the oil, right? So by this extraction and this refining of oil, climate change will get worse. The process by which oil is extracted and refined produces significant amounts of pollutants and greenhouse gases, okay? And again, there's large amounts of oil in this country, so it's probable that there will be large amounts of oil being extracted, right? They're going to want to try and get as much out as they can because they're going to try and get as much money as they can, etc. So there's going to be a lot of pollution, a lot of climate change damages happening as a result of this oil. On top of furthering climate change, these pollutants kill numerous people yearly. Just in the V5, oil production kills 91,000 people a year. Okay, that's not even before that oil gets consumed. It's simply just because of the oil production itself. That's killing 91,000 people per year. Okay, so even if this oil reserve is just say half the size of the United States, that still means that there will be thousands of deaths, for example. Okay, and that's simply just from the oil production, and that's before you consider the fact that the oil production. Not V5, US, I mean. Oil production, kills 91,000 people per year in the US. Okay, so even if this oil reserve is smaller than that of the United States, that still means tens of thousands of deaths per year. And that's simply from the oil production itself. Once the oil actually gets consumed, it goes in things like cars, it goes in things like airplanes, it goes in things like ships and trucks, and it gets burned and stuff like that. It gets burned to produce energy, electricity, all that kind of stuff that produces even more pollutants, that damages the ozone layer even further, that accelerates climate change even further. And all of that is just being contributed to by the fact that there's going to be oil production in this country. Yes?
Do you think that in the status quo, climate change is going to lead to extinction?
Well, I'll get into that in my second subpoint, okay? So this extinction, Judge, assuming there is extinction, but even if there's not extinction, it will kill hundreds of thousands of people in the process, right? And climate change is a huge issue, and it's just growing even more significant as we speak. So our second subpoint on this issue is reversing global tides, as I mentioned earlier. So, Judge, it's an irrefutable fact that right now, countries and many people are becoming increasingly disillusioned with oil. Right? I'd assume most of you see gas prices now, but if not, it's like over $6 in some areas per gallon of regular gas. Oil prices are just rising dramatically. Further, this is combined with the uncertainty of the war in Iran, which is making people wary of relying on fossil fuels. And people are aware that fossil fuels are pretty bad for the world, right? This is great. We want less fossil fuels for all the impacts discussed before. People are becoming disillusioned with fossil fuels, so people are seeing that as less reliable. It means more transition to other types of more sustainable fuels. But revealing a new large oil deposit would reduce the price and eventually add more oil to the market. This will not stop the decarbonizing trend. This will make the global oil industry worse for the environment. We cannot let this happen. This will accelerate climate change. So our second mention is exploitation. Judge, revealing that this country has large oil reserves will lead to massive exploitation of the country. First is exploitation of resources. It's already been stated that this is a poor agrarian country. It's not some wealthy nation that has the capability to resist foreign intervention. As oil stocks become more precious worldwide, countries will become more desperate. For example, in the Strait of Hormuz, it's blocking up a lot of the oil supply, driving prices up, and countries are desperate for oil because they need that for things like fertilizer and even just promoting their own economies, promoting their own industries and stuff, right? And this Strait of Hormuz crisis is unlikely to be resolved in the foreseeable future. Historically, when foreign powers have learned of oil in a nation, they can easily exploit, they do what they can to get that oil. And that's in situations where there's not a Strait of Hormuz crisis, right? Britain intervened in Iran in the early 20th century to basically take control of much of Iranian oil. The USA very recently captured Venezuelan leader Maduro, and one of the stated goals was securing Venezuelan oil, okay? That has not worked out well, historically speaking. In Iran, in the 1950s, they nationalized oil, which made Britain mad. Britain got the CIA to destabilize the country, and a once prosperous nation turned into what it is now, which is very bad for the citizens of Iran. Venezuela, nothing good has really happened since the U.S. intervened, right? So this isn't just two random examples. Military intervention by a third-party foreign nation is 100 times more likely when the country being intervened in has oil reserves, right? So there's potential catastrophic consequences for the people of the country. Foreign interference means lack of autonomy, and Western dominance, and it's more of a form of neocolonialism. So our second subpoint is the exploitation of the people of the country. Discovery of oil in countries is almost always bad for the people of those countries and workers brought in for oil. First, by those people's own governments. Like the Gulf states are huge oil producers, but they have terrible human rights records. Same with Russia, Venezuela, Algeria, etc. Those countries are all dictatorships and monarchies with lack of political freedom for the people living there. Second, by the intervening nations. When nations intervene, they really only care about oil. They treat the citizens of those countries very poorly. Iranians were treated very poorly by the British, treated as second or third class citizens in their own country. In Venezuela, nothing was really done to help them, which leads to resentment of the West, and it leads to further destabilization of those countries, as well as just human rights violations and overall negative impacts. So, Judge, for these reasons, I am very proud to affirm, and I urge the government ballot.
Hi, Judge. It's just going to be our contentions, two contentions, and then responses. Is everyone ready?
Yeah.
My time will start.
Wait, did you say anything over top of case first?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay.
My time will start now. On top of case, I don't think there's a lot of clarifications here. We just say that we obviously are going to be putting less weight on the utility for the geologist because it's a single person versus the rest of the world. And also we'd say that we characterize that the reveal means we tell the government first, and the government gets to enforce how the oil gets extracted and stuff like that. Moving on to our contentions. Our first contention is going to be on the economy. In the uniqueness, we say that right now, a poor country is on average, on the bottom, on the bottom level of the income scale. So these countries often have 10% of their population dying every year due to poverty, famine, and preventable disease. This is an urgent issue that is happening right now, but they cannot solve this because they simply do not have the funds in the government. Second, we'd say that agricultural-based economies are incredibly oppressive. One, we'd say that land is monopoly by a couple of big corporate companies, creating monopolies that drive up prices for essentials and daily needs for their citizens. Two, we say that agriculture is both grueling and also very vulnerable to weather conditions and diseases, blights, etc. Three, we say that a lack of money or the need for land for agriculture causes resource wars. This looks like wars over water and agriculture, which kill 8 million people per year in Africa in the status quo. But we say that what actually happens when you have oil is that it simply solves. The first example would be Norway, which went from a 20,000 GDP per capita to over 90,000 after they discovered offshore oil in 1969. Two, we said that oil revenue can account for 70 to 80% of government revenue. For example, Saudi Arabia used oil to provide free healthcare and education for all of its citizens. Three on this point, we'd say that oil creates jobs, especially with like high-skilled jobs in extraction technology and also like in infrastructure building and also just like around the country in general. And four, we'd say that this provides a stable energy source compared to biomass, animal dung, and coal, which is what most poor countries use. Stable energy is key to economic growth, and it's also key to powering houses in cold weather and improving the quality of life. But finally, we'd say that it is likely to be taken over by the government in partnership with multilateral organizations. So this will hold everyone accountable and responsible in this partnership. For example, Ghana in 2007 discovered oil and created a highly regulated oil market to fund government investments. What are the impacts there? I think fundamentally we just see less poverty. And how do we get there? We get there both through people just being able to afford to heat their houses, afford to pay for healthcare, and like getting more jobs in the economy, but also because the government gets more revenue from taxes and from taxing these big oil companies to fund infrastructure. That means that like the citizens are less burdened to care for their individual needs because the government is taking care of them. But two, we say that poverty is the root cause of war, terrorism, and radicalization. People in poverty are often forced to fight for money or fight over resources. If they are angry at the government, if they are angry at the rest of the world for not giving them support, they're more likely to be weak to extremist rhetoric. With that, our second contention is going to be on energy prices. What is the uniqueness? We see that one, the prices right now are at $144 per barrel because of a supply shortfall, and also the recent blockage in the Strait of Hormuz has Al Jazeera predicting prices will reach $200 per barrel. This is extremely high. Two, we said that 3.8 million people die each year due to illnesses caused by lack of energy that looks like, I don't know, like not being able to, like injuries from not being able to heat your house. This looks like not being able to get to the hospital because you can't like drive your car, etc. And three, we said that energy prices being high means two things. First, we say that household poverty increases 1% for each 2% increase in prices of oil. Two, we'd also say under this point that this makes developing clean infrastructure, i.e. trains, much harder because the cost of energy is so high. This infrastructure is really key to having accessibility for all the people in the country. The links here. One, we said that a large surge of the new oil increases supply while keeping demand the same. This is going to decrease the prices on the oil market, and I think that the impacts are pretty straightforward. The first impact is that there's going to be, yes?
You talk about how there are going to be people dying of illnesses from the lack of energy, but do you not deny there's also going to be an immense increase in death by the exploitation of oil and the producing of fossil fuels?
I'll move on to that in your case, but what we'd say is that what is not going to change is the dependence on fossil fuels, but the thing that does change is the source and the ability for the government to actually deal with the problems that comes up in that country. But I'm going to just move on to the impacts here. The first impact is that there's going to be less deaths due to energy poverty. The second is that there's going to be less household poverty. This improves the quality of life and reduces preventable deaths. And three, we said that cheaper energy makes it much easier for the governments to build transportation infrastructure, which decreases emissions from cars because public transit is like more energy efficient than cars. Moving on to responses to their case. Their first contention is on climate change, and they tell you that this comes first because of extinction and death. We have a couple responses here. The first is that like one reserve has little impact on the tide of climate change as a whole, so like we don't really see like a huge change in this. But second, we'd also say that the probability of this leading to like a huge influx of climate change is also quite low. We should also be considering that. And third, we say that yes, we also solve for climate change because we'd say that having a strong...
Stop your time.
Yeah.
Can you just repeat just like the last few sentences you said?
Yeah. From like the responses to...
Yeah, just the starting of first mention, just repeat that.
Yeah, I said that one reserve has little impact on like the global tide of climate change. It probably does because it's like a small, poor country. Two, we said that there's like a low probability of like these extinction impacts really happening as a result of your link chain. And three, we say that we also solve for climate change in our own way because we make it possible for governments to start investing in more energy efficient and better and cleaner infrastructure. I'm gonna resume my time. Now, so next we talk about how pollutants are killing a bunch of people. We talk about like 91 people per year dying in production in the US. But the thing is that this is like one, not just because of like the pollutants, it's also because maybe like the US has bad practices, but also we said that more people are dying from pollutants because of the traditional fuels that they do. 80% of people in sub-Saharan Africa use biomass for household needs, and the WHO calls this biomass the single largest environmental health risk. Why is that? That is because 11 million people die from high blood pressure caused because of pollution from biomass, and 4 million deaths around the world just happen as a result of this air pollution straightforwardly. We said that this is really, really bad because when you have a reliance on biomass, that means that we're always using it to cook food, to power your household. And we see that what we do is we are decreasing the reliance on biomass because oil leads to more energy production, and that sparks new infrastructure that replaces the old infrastructure that supported biomass, and also because oil is just generally more productive. And the impacts of these are really important. The first one is simply inequality, because this impacts women more, who spend 90% of their time indoors in poor countries like this. This means that they are uniquely affected by this pollution, and they also have less access to healthcare. Rural women in these poor countries face 1.3 times higher barriers to healthcare for reproductive age women. The second impact is just simply health. There's a lot of deaths that could be prevented. And the third is environment, because these biomass fuels produce 30 to 50 times more carbon per unit of energy versus coal, which is also worse than oil. Some coal is 97% carbon. This is also really, really bad. And coal is used more in these countries because it's easier to transport, etc. And on foreign intervention, we turn this, because weak economies force countries into debt trapping, like China's BRI. That means that in the status quo, countries already do not have autonomy. And two, we said that intervention is less likely because A, Trump and other leaders are temporary, and B, domestic political capital to intervene is low right now because people are upset about the failure of intervention in Iran. And the only reason that an intervention happens is in threatening dictatorships. And we say that this is symmetrical on both sides of the house. You don't automatically get a dictatorship because you have you rely on oil. But next we talk about reducing prices. And what we'd say here is, one, prices don't really matter to the desire to switch to clean energy. We saw how it kind of remained reliant through the supply shocks of Iran and the Russia-Ukraine war. And two, we said the economy comes first, because without a stable economy, you have no chance of switching to clean infrastructure. All these points about Venezuela and Iraq, I think that there are other reasons here, like Trump is irrational and he also wanted just clout in Iraq. And we'd also say that it is not in countries' interest to kill people to get oil. At worst, they reduce their autonomy, but that is symmetrical on both roads, because again, the dictatorship was probably already there. And we said that international relations basically checks back. The UN prevents these killings, and exploitation is worse when your economy is bad and when you are not able to feed your civilians.
Give me just 1 second to get my papers in order, and then I will begin my time. Let me organize these guys. Okay. Alrighty, sorry. Alright, so I would like to begin my time. If that is okay. Oh, by the way, are my judges ready? Are my opponents ready?
Yeah.
Right, is my partner ready? Yes. Alright, and please let me know if my pace is good, my cadence is good. With that, I would like to begin my time in 3, 2, 1. Good morning, judges. My name is Tyler Hari. In this speech, we're going to go for topic case, opponent's case, government case, and pamphlets. I'll get in the same way. With that said, the only thing I have with the topic case, because there wasn't really a lot of clash, they said that, oh, the judge is going to reveal this to the country first. I just really want to get clear that even if they reveal it to the country first, this will become known globally. Because you look at the prevalence of satellites in space, or countries with the ability to get information, no matter what, the world will know. Now, getting into their case, the first point is the point about economy. They give you a lot of points here, so I'm just going to go down the flow and rebutting everything they say. So the first thing they say is that, oh, poor countries are going to have a lot of good dying for you. But the real meat of this contention is that even if what they say is true, the catastrophic effects of oil will drastically outweigh, because oil exploration is going to lead to much worse effects. So let's look what they give you. Think about how there's going to be a load of monopolies in the agricultural economy driving up prices. But judge, in an oil, there's going to be loads of monopolies driving up the oil prices, because when you nationalize the oil economy, the whole point of the oil is that there's an economy of scale aspect to it. With agriculture, there's a bit of an economy of scale, but you can still have independent farmers being successful. You look at a place like Vietnam, there are a lot of independent farmers in Vietnam who are successful despite it being an agricultural economy. Therefore, oil is actually going to be a greater threat of monopolies, because in an oil economy, with the economy of scale, you need a lot of money to actually start oil refining. You need to get pump jacks, you need to get refineries. Oil is a greater threat for monopolies. Turn that point to the government case. Now, think about how, there's going to be diseases in the agricultural economy. But judge, same is true in an oil economy, even worse. Because you look at the pollutants of oil. Oil is one of the #1 causes of cancer. Yeah, maybe there's going to be a little bit of diseases in the agricultural economy. It's going to be worse with oil. You look at, and this is going to be a statistic I'm going to use later. This is from our Roland data, which is one of my favorite places to look at. If you look at per terawatt hour, this is per terawatt hour of electricity. Oil is the second deadliest. You want to know where biomass is, which they talk about a lot? It's fifth. So no matter what, if even the country's using the same amount of electricity, which is not, it's going to be using more. Yeah?
Per terawatt hour is a measure of energy, so if biomass is a lot less effective at producing energy for how much it's run than oil, then how is that measure accurate to say how much it's bad for people's health?
This is the death toll per terawatt hour. So a country's going to be using a certain amount of energy per year. If you're saying that they're using biomass, it means the country's to get all their energy through biomass. So it's going to be more deadly if they were to switch to oil, because again, the country's using the same amount of energy. In fact, with oil, it's using more energy. So there's going to be more deaths under an oil economy. Now, let's talk about here how, there's wars over water, they kill millions per year. But Judge, if you look at all the recent wars in history, what have they been over? They have been over oil. Look at the war in Iran, that is fundamentally over oil. Look at the Israeli news. Look at the war in Ukraine, right? There's a big thing about Russian oil being embargoed. The recent wars in history are all about oil. Do not let this point stand. They talk about how, they talk about Norway here. But Judge, Norway was 1969. They say that in their case. That's 60 years ago. All the evidence we give you of the Gulf states, we give you evidence of countries that are exploiting the people, are today. We're not talking about this from a 1969 perspective. We're talking about this from the 2026 perspective. Now, they also talk about how they're going to solve this. They talk about Norway. They talk about Saudi Arabia. It's going to create jobs. Oil is not going to be creating as much of these highly skilled jobs. It's going to be employing and it's going to be denigrating these workers. It's going to be putting them into subservience to the oil economy. You look at the monopolies. Look at the dangerous conditions oil workers face, Judge. You're going to be working on a pump jack, oil spraying at you, dangerous chemicals polluting the air. Is that the conditions you want to work in? Compare that to an agricultural economy where you're farming fields. You're not being faced with deadly plumes of smoke getting in your air or covered in oil or living in rusty conditions. Oil is worse. Fundamentally, the poverty, and they also talk about how it's going to provide jobs really, worsen poverty. But Judge, the poverty will only be lessened slightly. If you transition to an oil economy, you're still going to have the same people. You're only going to lessen the poverty slightly because these workers are going to be exploited for their labor by these monopolies. And even if the poverty is lessened a little bit, the threat of extinction, the threat of deaths from this oil drastically away, the threat of diseases, oil will make it worse. I want you to remember that. Now, the second connection is about oil prices. About how the price of oil will reach $200 per barrel. And yeah, we agree. That's basically what our second contention says. Now, they talk about how people die from illnesses of lack of energy. But Judge, you know what people die more from? Pollution and climate change. Again, climate change is one of the biggest points around. The opposition tries to tell you, climate change is not going to be a big issue. It's going to be solved. But Judge, that is not true. I ask you this. In the last 6 years, what has been done to solve climate change? We have seen the U.S. go out of the Paris Accord. We see the Gulf states still standing. They also talk about here how, we can use this to transition to a cleaner economy. But Judge, I ask you this. Is Saudi Arabia, who's been a prominent oil state, have they transitioned to a clean economy? Has the U.S., which is in a prime position to be a clean economy, are they a clean economy? No oil state in the world has transitioned to being clean. You cannot let that slide. That is a baseless accusation that will not happen. Now, they talk about this one about how household poverty increases 1% for even 2% of the price of oil. But Judge, this is so drastically outweighed by the threat of death and extinction. I want to be one of your key voting issues in this round is the threat of death. Also, there's really a source for this. Every point I've given you the world in data, or pointing out that 91,000 deaths comes directly from the New York Times. They don't really have a source. They're talking about how there's going to be a large increase in the oil supply, which is exactly what we're telling you. This increase in the oil supply will make oil more tantalizing for countries, which will exacerbate climate change. They're talking about how their side has less deaths due to energy poverty, less poverty, and easier to build transportation. All three of these are false. They have more deaths, because again, Judge, oil is so much more dangerous than the agricultural system. Yeah, maybe there's pesticides in agriculture that kill people. But Judge, in an oil worker, you're facing plumes of smoke. I tell you, I'm sorry, not right now. I give you the statistics of 91,000 people dying a year from just the U.S. oil. This is characterized by the motion to be a large oil supply. You cannot let the opposition try to swindle you into believing it's small. This is a large oil supply. There's not this idea about transportation and transitioning to a clean economy. But Judge, this is not going to happen because the oil industry will not let it happen. Again, first off, look at a place like any of the Gulf states. Have they transitioned to a clean economy? No, they have not. But furthermore, when you have a very powerful oil economy, right? So this is characterized as being a poor nation. So if they develop into oil, those oil companies are going to become really powerful. They don't want there to be public transportation. They want cars, because cars take oil and makes profits for them. So there's not going to be transportation. Now, getting into our case right now. So, our first point is about climate change. And they say, one country is not going to do anything. But this is just completely false, because of two main reasons. Now, one, I really want to point you to the info slide, which points us as being a large oil supply, which means it's going to be impactful for the world. That's just a truth of the round. If it was not a large oil supply, then all of their positives should be excluded from the round because they can't get anything done. So you must agree that it is large, so it will have impacts. And no matter what, it will make the price cheaper. It will make it more incentive. It will increase climate change. These are all definite facts. Talk about how there's low probability of an extinction impact. And I find that frankly hard to believe, because I ask you this, Judge, look anywhere across the world, what countries have transitioned away from oil? The answer is none of them. Even the US is still reliant on oil. China is still reliant on oil. The Gulf States is still reliant on oil. Climate change is not being solved. It is the greatest threat to society. They talk about how, oh, they're also going to solve for climate change. No, they're not going to solve for climate change. They're going to make it worse. Their only point in that is, oh, maybe we can transition to a clean economy. But Judge, don't let them swindle you into believing that. They do not have the fiat power to make that true. Look at history. Look at the world. This will not occur. They talk about, they talk about like pollutants, people dying with traditional fuels. They talk about biomass here. But Judge, I give you the statistics from our rolling data. Biomass is less deadly per terawatt hour. I don't know what the rebuttal was, like saying like, oh, terawatt hour is a unit of electricity. Countries, the way you measure the deaths is by electricity. That's how you're producing electricity with these systems. So no matter what, you must agree that oil is deadlier. They talk about how, oh, weak economies are going to trap countries in. But Judge, this is going to be worse under the threat of extinction. They talk about how reducing prices won't happen. The economy comes first. But Judge, I tell you, the lives of humans come first. Human lives come first. That is the single most important factor in the round. They talk about how women are impacted by like biomass. They're also impacted by oil production. Overall, Judge, you must vote government, because ours has decided that will save this country from innumerable deaths and save the world from extinction. Thank you very much. Hang on, can you just give us 1 second to get a paper ready? So we get
The order is going to be their case in order, our case in order, way. First, on the framing, one important characterization is that this would likely be government-owned. It would not be large private companies monopolizing on oil. It would likely be a government-owned industry. We gave you warranting for this. We told you the geologists would tell it to the government first, and we also told you the example of Ghana, where because the government wants to provide social services and probably has a monopoly on violence and the ability to control things in their country, the government is likely to own it and therefore use it for infrastructure. That means all their points about monopoly probably go away. But let's start on their contention about the climate. A couple of important responses to this, and the biggest one is that they concede that in the world right now, without this oil reserve being discovered, we are already heading towards extinction via climate change. What does that tell you in the round? It tells you there's not a link differential, because if right now we're already going towards extinction, if right now climate change isn't getting solved, their uniqueness is in the wrong direction because the world is already bad right now. There's a very low chance that they're able to solve this. Then they say that, oh, it's a pretty big reserve because otherwise we can't access our impacts. We can access our impacts insofar as a small amount of oil can modernize a country drastically, but it's not a big amount of oil that will actually cause a big harm to the climate. It's more important for that country than for the global climate. But the third response to this is that biomass is simply worse. They give you this statistic about like terawatt hours and pollution deaths, but we think the more important thing for climate change is the amount of carbon that's released into the environment, because that is directly what causes climate change. We told you biomass released 20 to 50 times as much carbon into the atmosphere as what they're doing, and we actually gave you analytical reasons for this, unlike their statistic. We told you that biomass is likely to be much less efficient per amount of biomass, and we told you it was uniquely worse for women. They say oil also exploits women. The reason biomass is so bad for women is because it pollutes inside the household, and that means that women who have to stay in the household for sexism and like other reasons in these countries are uniquely impacted. You're always preferring from this more marginalized community, impacts to them are more important. But then we told you this public transit term was extremely good. When there's a lack of energy, there's much less of political capital and ability to actually build public transit. They said that oil monopolies were going to lobby against public transit. We would say, one, it's likely the government who's owning the oil, but second, at least on our side, there's some amount of capacity to build that public transit in the first place. It doesn't matter how much lobbying there is, because on their side, you just cannot build public transit because there is no energy. Weigh this on the link differential, because the biggest cause of climate change in the world right now is cars, is other types of transportation. We get rid of those, which means our link into the climate is stronger. But then, go on to their second contention. Too many responses are conceded for them to actually get this. A couple of responses on foreign intervention. We told you this term is going to actually win us the round. It's that weak economies are a lot worse for foreign intervention because they force countries into debt trapping like China's BRI. Think about this logically. If your government is extremely weak, if your people are extremely poor, how are they going to resist foreign domination? How are you going to have a military? How are you going to resist terrorism? You're not. That's why in the status quo, these countries already lost autonomy. The only chance is for things to get better. Things just can't get worse. But we also told you intervention is extremely unlikely because one, it presumes that the country is already a dictatorship, which they're not allowed to fiat. But also we told you the political capital in these big countries was very low to have intervention because, for example, in the US and the UK, everyone is upset about the failure of intervention in Iran, so they're obviously not going to let another intervention slip by. Them talking about Trump repeatedly is not enough for them to win this point insofar as Trump is a temporary actor, and we give you broader incentive analysis. But third response they conceded is that international checkback by the UN solves for this. Violence isn't going to happen. The worst thing is a loss of autonomy, which already is happening. But then finally we told you it's not in the interest of big countries to kill people for oil. That's going to make it much harder for them to actually extract oil. What's in their interest is to have large multilateral partnerships that are actually fair. Otherwise the government is going to alienate them, and that makes it harder for them to get what they want. That entirely takes out their second contention. 4 conceded responses and a turn means you absolutely cannot vote on this. Then they say that oil leads to exploitation and lower wages. We told you what actually led to exploitation was agriculture, and we gave you reasons for this. But even if you believe that both agriculture and oil lead to exploitation, at least people have 2 options. At least now these industries have to compete with each other to pay higher wages to attract workers. That competition makes them inherently less exploitative. But move on to our case. Extend our first contention on the economy. The uniqueness is that the bottom 50 countries in terms of poverty have 10% of their population die every single year. That outweighs on probability because it's absolutely a guaranteed impact of lots and lots of people dying. They say that land being monopolized is non-unique. We told you that it wasn't about the companies, it was about the land in the first place. Because how do you do agriculture if you don't own land? The fact that these countries were split up by colonialism and land was largely given to certain big powers means that agriculture is necessarily monopolized, but the chance of an oil monopoly is a lot lower. They told you need a lot of money to have oil companies. We would say that's not true insofar as you also need money to do agriculture. But the more important point on this contention is not monopolies, it's not anything else. It's the fact that poverty is high in the status quo, and it's the fact that we've seen country after country double or triple their GDP because they're able to use the money from oil to provide infrastructure, to provide healthcare, and do all these extremely important things. But then why is this more important than their case? It's because of our turn. We told you poverty was the root cause of violence and resource wars. Because when you are poor, you are forced to fight over resources, and you are forced to fight in wars to get your sustenance. That's why 8 million people die every single year from resource wars. That's a guaranteed impact on our side. Then on our second contention, we told you the energy prices were extremely high in the status quo, $144 per barrel. They agree with this. They say we don't have sources, but the WHO literally told you 4 million people die every single year because they don't have energy. Increasing energy is necessarily good because it's going to decrease household poverty and stop preventable deaths. That's the easiest path to the ballot in this round. Let's go on weighing. The economy is more important than the climate. 3 big reasons. First, the transition into green tech into a better climate is extremely expensive. The WHO says it would cost $196 trillion per year, and household wealth has to be high, otherwise they're not going to be able to buy things like renewable energy to afford things like better cars. That means the environment is necessarily downstream of the economy because with a bad economy, you're never going to be able to fix the environment anyways. The government needs tax revenue to cause modernization. They said that oil economies never transition into renewables. 2 counterexamples. The first one is Saudi Arabia, which increased their renewable investment by $30 million this year, and Norway also doubled its solar in the last 10 years. Why is this important? It's actually incentive analysis. Countries know that oil reserves are going to run out. That's why they use oil for the short period of time, then transition to renewables. There's no reason why oil halts the transition into renewables. But second, outweigh the economy on the probability of solvency. Climate change is mostly big countries like China and the US. This small country clearly doesn't have an impact. And NASA already says that climate change is doomed. It's going to lead to extinction. It's already irreversible. That means the only delta in this round is the economy. The status quo is already bad. But third, we would tell you that our arguments are prerequisite to theirs because of political capital. When people are angry about their egg prices, about not having healthcare, they're not going to support renewables. That's why we see extremely poor countries not able to have political capital to support renewables in the first place. But then we also told you the economy is more important than foreign intervention. One, because a weak economy is a necessary prerequisite to foreign intervention happening, meaning if we solve for the economy, we solve for foreign intervention in the downstream. But second, we told you poverty was the root cause of war, the root cause of exploitation. People are exploited because they have no other choice. We give them another choice. So much weighing in this round, so many conceded responses. You're always voting on the economy and of lifting people out of poverty.
It's going to just be like kind of a new sheet. I'll just be going over some central questions in the round and then doing some weighting. Can you just like pop something? My time will start. I think that both of us can agree at the end of this round that climate change is bad right now, and I think that the first question that you have to look at is who can actually change the climate change, the tide of climate change. When you have no government, when you have no energy, the government has no money, the government can't even help poverty for its own people, it can't even solve for the material needs that people need every day. Do you think that they can really transition to renewable? They cannot, and this is a dropped point. You can extend this cleanly through. The government just does not have the capacity to do any renewable policy at all in the world. That means that there is zero chance in their world for any renewable change to happen. This is a dropped point again. We'd also say that no one just wants to invest in this country's renewable energy in the first place. Again, these companies do not have money. They are not there are no oil companies. There are no energy companies in this country. It is all agriculture. That means you have zero climate innovation. This means that other countries are just exploiting you as a breadbasket. They are not giving you any money or any support to transition to renewable energy. My opponents talk a lot about these changing tides of oil, but we say that the people's opinions on the price does not matter. What actually does matter is people's capacity to actually act on that change. They cannot act on that change in their world, and in our world, we actually do change the opinion because people look and they have attention on the energy infrastructure, and they're look, we want to get more money in order to help the climate change crisis further down the line. In their world, no one cares about energy. No one cares about this small country. No one is doing anything to support that. But again, we tell you throughout this round that you need to have economic benefits, and Ritika tells you that you need $196 trillion per year. No one is just going to randomly airlift this money into this country. We are the only side that they can give you. And we tell you that when you actually get this money from oil, we give you the examples of Saudi Arabia and Norway. Extend the incentive analysis from Ritika's speech. But I think that the economy just simply comes first at the point where the root cause of exploitation is desperation, is the fact that you do not have money, and is the fact that the other countries in the world just think you are easily able to be stepped on because you have no autonomy and you do not have any resources to fight back. And we'd also just say that the probability for solving for the economy is also the highest and is supported by many empirics. But let's look at the probability here. I think that there's a 100% probability that these countries are suffering right now. My opponent's only response to all of our stats about how these countries are suffering is that oil does worse. But we tell you that there is right now there's a 100% probability that 10% of the population dies each year because of poverty. There's a high probability that 4 million deaths are being caused annually just because of biofuel. This is 100% probability. We tell you that these countries are polluted right now, and you do not want to ignore these people's suffering. It just in hopes that you can maybe somehow fix the climate crisis by getting a magical sum of money. But let's look at the probability versus magnitude meta weighting. Because considering magnitude first is always going to lead to inaction because they're scared of the ripple effects and the butterfly effects from dropping one penny leading to a nuclear war. You want to look at the probability first. And we tell you that the probability is high, but also our magnitude is high because you can look to the long term versus the short term.
Point of order, stop your time. The point that the judges should not evaluate magnitude at all because of a butterfly effect is a new argument brought up in the speech.
That was not that you shouldn't evaluate it at all. That it was that like you should evaluate probability first in order to inform your magnitude. But that's also weighing.
Even still, the idea of a butterfly effect.
Sorry,
seems
no,
but
that's
something
back
like
and
this.
forth. But also, this is just weighing. I think this is just a weighing claim. But you can drop that butterfly effect point if you want to. Resuming my time now. But look at the long term versus the short term. At most, they're just going to have at most we just have a couple more barrels of oil. That is the biggest harm that they cause in return for having long term governmental stability, governmental funding, and the ability for the people to actually have autonomy over their own futures. You don't have people dying of poverty. You have a stable government where the government is regulating the energy system to make sure that you're not just going to have your entire population wiped out because of an agricultural blight or because of a natural disaster that they simply cannot cope with. And we tell you that exploitation is simply going to happen less with a strong government, and that is going to lead to more autonomy. And autonomy is very, very key because it allows governments to actually be able to do what is best for them, millennia into the future. That is really, really important. So at the end of the day, you're weighing the fact that right now, the climate change, we can agree it's bad right now. Their uniqueness is in the wrong direction. At worst, the extinction happens on both worlds, but we are the only people who can materially solve for this extinction. I want you to remember that when they try to get up here and compare a couple barrels of oil versus long-term stability. Thank you.
Is everyone ready? Okay. Then my time will begin. It's fine. I'm going to start my 5 minutes on the first one. Okay, Judge, just to start with some top of case, I'd just like to make one clarification. This country does actually have very large oil reserves, as we defined in our first, as we defined our first characterization, as defined by the info side. It's not a few barrels of oil, as they would have you believe. This is actually a large amount of oil that could flood the global stage. And as we characterized in our first speech, this country will be incentivized to produce a lot of oil and get this oil onto the global stage as fast as possible. This was not responded to, so we would like to make this clarification and make it very clear to you that that is actually what is going to be happening. Now, I'm going to get into some key points of clash in this debate, and the first point of clash on this debate that I want to start off with is the treatment of workers, especially local, poor workers, right? Because both sides agree that we should do something about this, and we should help these people, right? Okay, the people in this country, okay? So OP tells you that oil is good for these people. They point to disease, they point to monopolies, they point to jobs, they point to wars, okay? They say that oil helps with GDP, and it solves these issues. However, this is simply untrue for many reasons, as my partner brought up, and these were not fundamentally answered in the op block, okay? So on the point of oil is actually worse from a health perspective than biomass, okay? Again, looking at the deaths per terawatt hours or whatever, oil places second, biomass places fifth, okay? So that means that even if biomass is marginally worse for certain groups of people, such as women, overall, oil is worse for, the vast majority of people, yes. And that includes women as well, okay? So oil in general is worse for the vast majority of people. So if we're evaluating impartially from just a utilitarian calculus of what is best for these people, you must vote oil on the health point. And then on the point that local workers get jobs, no, local workers don't actually get skilled jobs, right? They say maybe in Norway, where the local worker is average, on average more trained, has more training than a farmer or something, they will get the skilled job. But in a poor country, such as the Iran example we gave you earlier, they do the hard, they do the dangerous work, they get treated as second-class citizens. They don't get good jobs, they get the jobs that no one else wants to do. They get the jobs that the rich people who are building the oil plants don't want to have, okay? Then on monopolies, oil monopolies, price fixing, etc. It's worse than the agrarian monopolies. The government owning the oil doesn't really do anything to change this, and I'm allowed to respond to this because this is a new characterization made in the op law, okay? The government owning the oil doesn't really do anything to change monopolies. For example, Saudi Arabia is a government-owned oil monopoly, right? But that's still a monopoly where the average citizen, sure, they build infrastructure projects and whatever, but the average Saudi Arabian citizen doesn't feel that as much as the very rich elite Saudi Arabian citizens who they're actually building the infrastructure for, okay? So oil monopolies are still a thing. And then finally on the point of wars, oil wars are a real thing, and it's potentially way more devastating than water wars, and this was completely conceded. Look how many wars are being fought even today over oil. Look how many wars have been fought over oil, okay? Oil wars are a real thing, so don't let them point out these benefits and say, oh, there's super high probability that people are suffering now, and that switching to oil will somehow make it better. That's simply untrue, okay? So you are not going off of this, and all of these are proof of our second contention. Fundamentally, oil is bad for local people. It's bad for these local impoverished farmers and everything, right? It gives power to dictators. It gives power to monarchies. It gives power to government monopolies, right? Who can then have money to overlook these people and have money to build stuff for the wealthy people of the country, right? Work hard.
Where would I stop time?
Yeah.
I think that the articulation that the oil is going to give money to bad actors and that money they're going to use to exploit people is a new argument.
No, that was made. I can respond. that was made very clear in our second contention. The first subpoint of our second subpoint of our second contention, where we said that countries seek to they don't seek to, but they oftentimes do exploit their local people.
And that was also brought up
As a
in my
result of
speech
oil.
with monopolies, that monopolies are going to use this money to exploit workers. So it brought up in both of our speeches.
Yeah, but regardless, I'll let the judge take it into consideration. All right, I'm at 2:55, so that leaves me with what, 2:05? All right, I'll resume time. Yeah, okay, so these workers are working hard labor jobs that are very dangerous. They have chemicals being sprayed on them. It's horrible things. They also lose influence in their own nation. There's human rights violations that are being covered up by these oil-producing nations, etc., okay? So also, it completely disregards, okay, so anyways, the fact is that oil leads to exploitation, and so this is not like a clear win for side opposition, as they would have you believe. So don't vote off on the point that people are suffering right now, and oil will do something to alleviate this. Oil causes suffering too, and there's also a very high probability of that. But the next key point of clash that I really want to harp on, the really point that I think wins side government around very cleanly, is climate change. Right now, regardless of what Op tells you, we are actually not trending towards climate change. I don't know why this is conceded is not, okay? Our first contention makes this clear. Climate change is getting better right now. Countries are shifting away from it, especially due to the Strait of Hormuz situation, which is completely unique to the status quo, right? Countries are seeing oil as very unreliable. They're shifting to renewables because they don't know. Yeah.
I think the characterization you made in your first and second speech was that climate change is leading to extinction right now and it's getting worse right now. So I think that the argument that climate change is improving in the status quo is a new argument.
That's our second
I
subpoint
can-
of the first contention.
Second subpoint is that countries are becoming increasingly disillusioned with oil, building renewables to counteract oil-based climate change. That's our second subpoint. But I'll let the judge take it. All right. Anyways, I'll resume time. I have a minute and 12 seconds right now, right? Okay, so countries are shifting away from oil, they're shifting towards renewables, they see oil as unreliable, etc., right? That means that, Judge, we are at a unique tipping point right now, which makes it try or die go. The Strait of Hormuz crisis, as we brought up in our first speech, means that countries are finally able to look away from oil. Right now, prices are so high, they're reaching $200 a barrel, as our oil opponents mentioned, that it's forcing investments into renewables, right? In case, oil prices continue to climb, countries can't afford to, supply themselves with oil because it's getting so expensive. Both sides agree that renewables are good for climate change, okay? Our opponents gave you an own quote saying that countries know they will run out of oil, that's why they're transitioning. That's our opponents' own words, right? They're transitioning to renewables because they know they're going to run out of oil. So what does the opposition do? Opposition floods the global marketplace with oil. Opposition brings oil prices down, allowing countries to continue along the comfortable path of oil use, the comfortable path that leads to climate change and leads to global extinction and catastrophe. It delays renewables throughout the world because they can just point to, oh, we have all this new oil, we can delay renewables. This is what they fundamentally misunderstand. They try to misconstrue our argument to make it sound like one country can't do anything, and it's only a few barrels of oil, nobody does anything, but that's not what this is, okay? To quickly recap, you can feel very comfortable voting for government off of this point, right? It's try or die now. The turning point on it is now. Opposition world allows go to put off renewables until later, which leads to climate change. For these reasons, I'm incredibly proud to be on the side. Thank you.
Okay. Would like to step outside and come back? Let me get some sun.